gonna start reading books, right? I mean, like those are the types of challenges, at least for me and for the people that I've worked with, that I think can make a massive difference. Whatever the challenge is, whether or not it's a pandemic or whether or not it's an injury, where it's like, I've suffered a bad injury, I can't be on the bike. Well, what else can you do during that time? And I think that there's a lot of, I think the opportunity in those scenarios is the same.
And just from my own mental, since I'm not working, I feel like, once again, I don't want to be in trouble with the dishes thing. So I've been trying to do things that help me. Actually read, I'm physically reading books, one on Kindle, one an actual book. I recommended and got in trouble last week that people read Anne Frank's book, but that was more of a sarcastic situation. I'll talk to that offline.
Yeah, and doing a little bit of my background research on you as a podcast host, I did come across a little of that controversy. And it made me, I've deleted all of even my business social media accounts.
All right, welcome everybody to the Between Two Wheels podcast. This is Tyler Janke. On today's show, we're continuing our slog through the pandemic by doing some interviews. And today we have a wonderful, exceptional cycling coach, friend, mentor, teammate, Nate Dunn. I just want to say real quick, Nate Dunn, Coach Dunn, a few years ago, I had taken off time from cycling. I was getting fat. I was riding my golf cart, eating a lot. And you and I started up conversations and you got me back into cycling. And I will say it's probably been the absolute best 8 years of my life due to the fact that I've got back into cycling. Welcome to the show. Once again, Nate Dunn, how you doing? And what do you want to say about your involvement in my life back in cycling?
Yeah, well, I always remember so for those of you that don't know, Tyler and I are related through marriage. So we would interface at family gatherings.
Right.
And so, you were always an interesting conversation to have. You're the only one that really cared anything about cycling. Everyone else would entertain those conversations. But I think we probably had similar experiences at different points where I was pretty new to cycling and I was like, this is just amazing. And the people that I'm meeting and the experience of racing, and, I've been involved in sport my whole life and yet I've never done anything like racing a bike. It's just the coolest thing ever. And it's totally changed my life. So it was so much fun to engage in those conversations with you. And then at the same time, it was like, hey, you need to start riding again, man. Like you know how to ride a bike. Like we got a small group of us that are just starting up something new. It's going to be fun. And you should totally start riding with us. I remember your first Cat 5-ish, Cat 5, Cat 4. I don't remember where you came back at, but I remember telling guys, I think Curt was there, a handful of other guys, and I'm like, Tyler can ride a bike. I'm like, look at this guy. He's and you might have been pushing 200 then, or maybe it was less than.
But like in the 170s.
But I can still see it. See it. That's the talent of a coach. I can see through that. So
what was funny is that was Cyclebration late in the year, and I had totally torn my Achilles heel in February of that year. So I had it mended. I was starting to come back and do some riding. And so, I did a 1-day license, Cat 5, which was probably a little sketchy. And then we made our way up. Just saying, with your help and whatnot, I'm a Cat 1 again. So just throwing that out there. Who cares? Yeah. So Nate Dunn, data-driven athlete, coach, owner, everything else. How is the pandemic treating you and your family, just on a personal spectrum? And then we'll talk about the business side of it too. But for those of you that don't know, Nate had a liver transplant a few years ago, and I'm sure that has complicated your immune system. So I'm sure you have a little bit different feeling about all of this than a few others. But tell us how it's going. 2 small kids trapped in a house.
Yeah. So, obviously this topic is massive. It's fun to talk to you just because I would consider myself to be kind of a, more of on the melancholy solitary side, but there's that. And then there's like living through a pandemic. But I would say along those lines, our family is probably pretty well positioned for something like this. I work from home. Our family life is really small and local. So we are accustomed to spending a lot of time together. My wife works as a nurse, so there's no concern about her job security. Excuse me. But like you mentioned, like we have, unique risks in our family, as every family does. But our family has unique risks that have made this different to us. And like you mentioned, anyone that has had an organ transplant, they take immunosuppression therapy. So by nature of having an organ transplant, you are immunocompromised, for the rest of your life. And so then that, in addition to my wife working in a hospital setting, being in this, so that that has influenced our experience of a lot of this. And at the same time, we're just like everybody else, where it's just like you wake up and it's Groundhog Day, and you're like, I think I think like in many ways we're well positioned for this. As a coach, I love structure. I love discipline. I love routine. It's what my life is like fueled on. And I think if you didn't have those types of routines in your life, then probably a lot of people have been experiencing the benefit of that. I know for us and our family, it's like the only way for us to just kind of continue to move forward. It's like, we get up with the kids. If my wife's at work, we have breakfast. We do some schooling for her. We do an hour of exercise, mostly riding bikes. And then we come back. We have a set routine, and that's been really, that's been our bread and butter, kind of to
I just want to say it's so interesting. Like you say, structure, that you need structure and it's great for you, and that this has probably been good for others who are in this situation who would need structure. But and I would somewhat agree. But you've got to admit, there's people out there that this has not been good for them because they don't understand the need for structure and they're not using structure. So this is actually maybe more of a torment. I'm working from home. My wife always works from home. We have the kids. I don't care about necessarily, this is horrible, people. Going out, I've got my support staff here, family-wise. So I'm building a chicken coop. I'm doing my solo rides. Life's not that bad. I mean, I want to put that in a very small microcosm as far as like some of the mental health. You take my business side of it, that's not necessarily a wonderful situation. But what about those people that don't have the structured and that maybe listen to this going a little crazy? What can you give them as advice for trying to take that task on?
Yeah, well, that's been the wild thing, is that like, I know you're a podcast listener and I consume a ton of podcasts. Those habits have had to change, where some of the podcasts I enjoy most, like if we're going to talk about COVID all day, like I'm out. I'm not tuning in your podcast, right? I'm living it, as is everyone else in the world. Right. Like I don't need, but I think that in terms of, that's been what's interesting, is that the experience of people is so varied. Like for those of us maybe that we're accustomed to working from home, we're kind of solitary. Maybe our life was pretty small and it wasn't a life of travel or of that kind of stuff. This isn't huge. And then on the other hand, you have people who, and my wife has been working on the end of this, people who are living in abusive, my wife works in pediatrics, so people who are living in abusive relationships, and then you have this amping up the pressure of maybe relationships that are challenging, or kids that are in abusive relationships. And obviously that branches off into the larger implications of how we try and manage this, right? About not just the health consequences, but the consequences of, that different people are feeling differently. So I would cloak all this within, like, in many ways, I come from a privileged perspective of like, discipline and focus and structure is something that I just liked. I was lucky enough to kind of like that. And so this has been a chance to kind of, it's like I've been training for that, right?
Right.
So, but what I would say is that, for other people, I think that, like anything else, you can view periods like this as kind of moments where you kind of go off the rails and you have like a tub of ice cream, in the freezer, or you can view it as an opportunity to kind of revamp systems. And again, I realize that part of that is kind of a privileged perspective to even maybe have the ability to think about it in those terms. But I know for me, and for our family, looking where there is opportunity, I think our life as a family and my health challenges have kind of imbued that perspective in our family, and that has not changed during this. So
I would even say, I don't know, maybe I don't understand what you mean by privilege, but you're, as a coach, I mean, I think you have not some obligations, but this is part of what people look for, right? Is give me some ideas of what to do. And so you've got this down. And look, I mean, people that can watch this, they can look and they can say, oh, he looks like he's fit. He looks like he could be a cyclist. Yeah. Who wants to take direction from someone who is telling them how to be orderly in their life, but isn't orderly, wants to be fit, but isn't fit? And those are small aspects. I know you can be a great coach and stuff without that. But I think the understanding and maybe you have some more obstacles of recognizing people who can't get there or aren't there already. And so, and maybe speak to that.
So I'll give you two specific examples. One from kind of home life, and then one from sporting life. So when I look at something like this, I think, first of all, I hear people talking about how, oh my God, I've made it through 100 shows on Netflix, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, you could learn a language with that amount of time, right? Over the course of 3 months, if you want to embrace discipline and you want to embrace a different way of doing things, you could shed 30 pounds.
Maybe they're watching novellas, though, the Spanish language soap operas. Anyway, sorry.
Right. So I think from that angle, like even from kind of a cycling performance perspective, right, and what I've been talking about with my athletes is like, what is your project right now? If racing is done, and maybe that's a different topic, but I think it's probably unlikely that USA Cycling sanctioned races come back this year. If it's done, that doesn't have to signal the end of your progress, right? You can shift your focus to many different projects or systems in your life that you could make a strong case for will actually contribute to a greater degree to your progress when things rebound next year or whenever they come back around. So I think that's one angle from the training perspective, is to say there are a lot of different things to work on as a cyclist, and the actual training part is just one of them, right? How do you even get to the place where you can execute, let's say, for a lot of people, what might be a big week, maybe 12 hours, 15 hours a week. There's a lot of stuff that goes into just being able to do that, right, in terms of managing your time, in terms of, maybe having a bike that is functioning well in a bike space that is well organized and that you can simply get on your bike and go. Right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into a lot of systems that go into just making that a reality. So there's a whole lot of, projects that one could take on that maybe aren't, directly related to, doing, preparing for a race or whatnot. So I would say that's one side. On the other side of it, like on the home side, and this is something that I've been working on myself, is that my whole life, I have hated doing dishes, right? Probably like most people, I hate doing dishes. Now that has come into direct conflict with the fact that I'm married to a woman who loves cooking. I mean, cooking is life. So when she cooks, it's not like when I cook food. The kitchen blows up. There's stuff on the floor. There's chopped vegetables everywhere. There's like 5 different bowls that need to be cleaned, blah, blah, blah. So first, I don't like cleaning dishes. We've established that, right? So I've kind of like, at the beginning of this whole pandemic thing, I had this kind of vision in my mind, and I said, I don't know what this is going to look like for my wife as a nurse going into the hospital every day. Right. We still don't know what that might look like. But here's the deal. When she walks through after a 12-hour day, the kitchen is going to be, it's not going to be clean. It's going to be spectacular. Like, it's going to make a visual impact. When she walks through the doors and the kids are bathed and they're ready to roll, they're ready to go to bed, and she walks in and the kitchen is spotless. That's my project. Like, I can do that. Right?
Are you using lighting to make sure this is visible to,
Well, no, but I mean, it's like, because probably all men go through this. It's like there's kind of cleaning the kitchen, dude, where there's still crumbs and like stuff. And then there's like, no, like I got in the floor, all the little sticky spots, like the hardwood looks perfect. All the counters are clean. It's dialed, right? So that's just another example, I feel like, of I can change my relationship to how I view different types of tasks. And that the ability to do that, the opportunity to do that, I think is easier when the rest of life is kind of chaotic. It's helpful. It's been helpful for me to say, okay, I can't do this. I can't ride with my friends. All these other outlets that might kind of feed me as a person. I can actually feel a lot of pride in how I clean the kitchen. And and that's a project. That's a project that I can do. So,
I want to make a comment about that because, so I absolutely adore my wife, and it's been somewhat enjoyable. Like okay, two things real quick. You talked about abuse and how that thing is going. So the courts are pretty much closed. I do family law. One of the things I also do with that is domestic violence restraining orders. And we had a trial set, and the trials are not going except for Placer County. 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, we had a trial. And so it went on, and, those kind of things are happening. And it was a 3-day trial. It was all fun, as enjoyable as those things go. But my wife said to me, she's like, it was you leaving the house. It was, I missed you, So the point is there's this good connection. And yeah, I was like, I've been here, 24/7. It's been fun. But we've had one nasty little blow up, and it was me putting a dish. The dishwasher was full. I mean, it was being run. And I put a dish on the left side, or didn't do something. It was just, I was going to come back and do it. And it's sentimental. Because she's had, it's this buildup, and it's exactly your situation. She cooks all the time. She's used to being home, so she sends everyone off to work, and now everyone's here. And I screwed up the one dish thing. So she can't listen to this podcast because I don't want her to get any ideas about what that. But it's interesting how routines, you talk about routines, and that was her routine of that one little thing that went right. So what I did for that was, and I've made some offhand comments here. I decided to build a chicken. Well, she wanted me to, and the other one's dying out. A chicken coop, and it is the effing Trump Tower of chicken coops. I can't.
Saw the picture.
It's got full on shingles. It's out of control.
Yeah,
but it's done. Okay, now it's up to her.
You could live in it. Yeah,
and I can't tell you the man cred I have with her right now. It's over the top. So it's worth it. And here, I think she wanted me to do this just to see me fail. And I expected to, but and I did a few times along the way. Anything you want to mention about that?
So I would just say, to summarize that, like, I think I like looking at challenges as projects. And when I say that that's a privileged position, I mean, like, that's not anything I've done to be great. It's something that was baked into my genes, right. and it's something that I like. And obviously,
but you had to take and I'll let you get back here. You had to take the kitchen thing as a mental, like, hey, this is important, and almost recognize it.
Yes.
It's like I've told my son about birthday, Christmas gifts. Try to remember when someone says, "Oh, I like that," as a project I'm going to put it in my head or write it down for something to buy them later, rather than just, oh, that's nice that they like it. Anyway, you had to mentally activate.
Yeah, so I think, like, either in the terms of cycling and training, or in the terms of, like, domestic duties or anything like that. Like, we are afforded these choices of, like, am I going to? And I don't even have the time. My wife and I, we don't, with 2 young kids, we don't even have the time to spend watching Netflix. So maybe, again, that's not a temptation that we even have. But if those are your choices, if your choices are, I'm gonna zip through like 100 shows on Netflix during this time, or I'm going to begin to try and invest in a habit of reading, right? Like, nobody reads books anymore, and maybe that's been something that's been interesting, or that you've wanted to do, and it's like, I'm gonna start reading books, right? I mean, like, those are the types of challenges, at least for me and for the people that I've worked with, that I think can make a massive difference. Whatever the challenge is, whether or not it's a pandemic or whether or not it's an injury, where it's like, oh, I've suffered a bad injury, I can't be on the bike. Well, what else can you do during that time? And I think that there's a lot of, I think the opportunity in those scenarios is the same.
And just from my own mental, since I'm not working, I feel like, once again, I don't want to be in trouble with the dishes thing. So I've been trying to do things that help me actually read. I'm physically reading books, one on Kindle, one an actual book. I recommended and got in trouble last week that people read Anne Frank's book, but that was more of a sarcastic situation. I'll talk to that offline.
Yeah, and doing a little bit of my background research on you as a podcast host, I did come across a little of that controversy. And it made me, I've deleted all of even my business social media accounts.
And I want to talk about that. You want to lead into that with this?
Yeah. If that's what's next on tap, we can jump in.
Whatever. I've had a list.
Yeah. So basically, the more reading that I've done, like the last 12 months, I've been working on a book, and I've just been reading probably the last 2 years. Like, reading has just been my it's been a rediscovery. Not even a rediscovery, it's a discovery, because you go through school and like, it's not like you're ever really reading things that you enjoy. Exactly. And then you enter, kind of the professional workplace, and it's not like you don't, and then in that transition of my life, right, the internet happened and YouTube happened, and all of those things create, they eliminate the friction to be entertained. And the act of reading a book is probably there's the most friction there, right? It's hard to get there. And when you get out of that habit, it's difficult to do.
Right.
And so anyways, a couple years ago when I kind of started getting into that habit, and then it was like, once you kind of start getting on that train, it's just like exercise. It's like when you improve your cardiovascular fitness, it feels different to go on a long bike ride. And when you kind of get back into that routine of actually reading, you operate on a different level cognitively. So anyways, in some of the reading that I was doing, one of the topics that is of most of interest to me is kind of this intersection of technology and how that impacts our focus and our ability to be disciplined and to achieve goals. And, one of those kind of big topics, obviously, and the other side of that too, I would say, is the fact that we have 2 young kids, and what are the choices that you make about screen time with your kids? And so my wife and I have been having these conversations. I've been reading these books and just thinking a lot about social media. And then of course there's the larger kind of cultural impact of social media and its impact on kind of its, polarization of our country and the rest of the world. And so anyways, from a business perspective, when you just get down to brass tacks, the pitch that is made to every business person is you've got to be there, right? Like you've got to have a Facebook account. You've got to have an Instagram account. This is the place that you can connect with people that care about your business. And this is the place really that you can get free exposure and connect with people in a way that is going to improve your business, right? So I was reluctant at first. I kind of got on board a little bit, but I was never any good at it. I didn't want to do it. It was never something, that I was really interested in. And finally, the more that I read, I was like, is it possible to just say, no, I'm just not going to do that, right? Like I'm going to try and kind of try a different route where if people want to access what I'm writing, or if people want to, access, they can go to the website or they can sign up for a newsletter, and it's, it operates completely outside kind of the social media thing. And again, I felt really reluctant to do that. Facebook and Instagram as well, the engine that drives their business,
algorithm.
I'd say, yeah, well, and their business pitch is constantly even initiating fake notifications for you to click on, right? It's, they are throwing everything at you as a business owner to say, you have got to get on this hamster wheel if you really want to have success in terms of social media. And for some businesses, that might work for them, and that works with how they think. But for me, it was difficult for me to make any case that investing time in social media was anything but an impediment to me being a better coach. There's no way you could sit down and say, hey, it really matters if you're on social media and you're engaging with your athletes and you're liking their pictures. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. Like,
what about the business acquisition of actually business and clients?
I'm sure, I'm not a marketer, and I'm sure there's smart marketers that would say you could earn more business if you were really driving social media campaigns and you had your training tip Tuesday and your blah, 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 whatever, and you were just on that hamster wheel. And I just finally came to a choice where I was like, I don't really care. Like if that results in X amount less clients or X amount less money, I'm comfortable with that. Like I like the life better where I'm not tethered to social media. That's just for me. That's not a judgment call on how anybody else decides to engage with social media. So in looking at your little interaction, and I do still have a Twitter account. I consume a lot. That's kind of my primary way of consuming, kind of getting updates on new academic research and academic researchers, but I don't engage in the platform. But even that, even the restrictions that I put on myself with Twitter, you go in, you log in, and then you see trending topics. And then you go into the wormhole. You go to the wormhole of clicking on something. And then it's just, especially and then it's just,
right.
And then you're reading threads and the intensity of emotion and feelings. And all of a sudden, I'm loathing myself as my kids are sitting outside waiting to have a picnic lunch with me. I'm reading a bunch of garbage on Twitter. That is a total colossal waste of my time. And it's a waste of my personal time. And I'm convinced that it offers nothing in a business or in a coaching context. So that's
I absolutely agree. And, like for me personally on my business, we have a website, and it's really splash page. There's nothing to it, but people need to be able to, sometimes I don't even meet my clients until I'm going to court, and I'm like, here's my website. Here's a picture of me so we can find each other. Yeah. And, you need contact, and you look up other attorneys, and you got to have like that. I don't run, and this is probably bad even for, maybe there's a difference here. I don't know, maybe there's a marketing thing, but when you do have a social media presence, such as Twitter, like I do, but you don't actively engage it very much, is that worse than just like removing yourself, or those people that are inundated with just they're doing stuff, so they're really up there? I don't know. Personally, the mental part of it is exactly right. We had a little, and I'm going to talk to Paul. I'm going to do a podcast with him just so we kind of talk some of this stuff out, because I think that would be helpful as well. But he has a big following and says something online and it blows up, and I don't actually give too much of a F about it. So I'm just like, whatever. And there's, people climbing on with their hate and stuff, and so be it. But so mentally though, that's also, at the time, I'm just kind of like, easy, and let's go for a ride. So it's really interesting that you've done that, especially the way that cycling is. Have you seen any fallout? Let me ask you this. This is kind of a thing I've been wanting to say. Your business, did the AB5, did that affect coaching? Do you not have coaches with you now? Do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah. So that's another really interesting.
Because my point was going to be, then hire someone to do all your social media, where you personally, it's not on you.
Yeah,
and maybe
I
that
thought
would be
about that. I thought about that option. To go back to your point real quickly, so one of the books I had read, it's called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and he basically talks about how, like, his pitch is not that social media is bad or that you should avoid it. It's just to do a cost-benefit analysis and to say, what am I getting from social media? What am I not? And for you might be able to read some of that, and you can kind of like insulate your feelings from it. I can't do that. Like, a Twitter comment or like it could very well occupy days of my life, right?
I'm not saying it hasn't, actually. Yeah. And my immediate reaction was, I heard this from some really good troll that just does shit online on Twitter, and he's like, you don't immediately react. You take some time back, so that if your whole thing is making fun or doing whatever, that it's done in that right kind of mindset. And so my thing was just, I started to get into this, but hey, thank you. Let's talk about it. Yeah. But anyway, continue on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So AB5. So AB5 came out, and obviously this is your wheelhouse, working in law. And so if I overstep anything,
this is probably more your wheelhouse.
Okay. Well, if I misstate anything, you can let me know. But so, I saw AB5 coming a year and a half ago or whatever, and I'm reading it and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, it's very obvious that this legislation is going after the big boys. They're going after Uber and DoorDash and, kind of this gig economy that I think there are legitimate criticisms there. And we're going to have to figure that out. I don't know how to do it, but whatever. There's a reasonable debate. And then there's the rest of us out there, musicians or people that are working in small businesses who have, what's that? Writers. Yeah, exactly.
Writers. That was a big one.
Yeah, content creators or people that are working in like a contract role for different websites, stuff like that. So it's very obvious that those are situations where there's no. To me, it seems obvious that those are situations where there's no. No one's being taken advantage of here, right? Like there's no. So I'm looking at this now and I'm thinking like, this is not like, I see this coming, but this can't possibly apply to me. Well, it passes, blah blah blah. I still kind of keep my head in the sand about it, and then I start talking with some other coaches, and I hear about one of the largest coaching companies, maybe the biggest one in the U.S., and they've essentially switched all of their California coaches to hourly rates, right, to comply with this. And some other coaches who have decided to let go the coaches that have been working with them under that independent contractor label, right? So I'm looking at this, and then I'm thinking to myself, it's very obvious that in this case, the question is, what is my willingness to accept risk on this, right? Like, and for me, and this also goes into, I think, a larger shift in the coaching industry. where I think AB5, in addition to, I think, changes in the coaching industry, made it to where accepting that risk didn't make any sense to me. I've worked for 10 years, like on my coaching business. It's a part of how we support our family. This isn't a side gig for me. This is my full-time job. And so to risk that didn't make any sense for me. And that was after spending the last 5 years really investing heavily in the coaches that worked with data-driven athlete, and really enjoying working with them and enjoying kind of I'm hoping that in the future there's a different type of coaching arrangement that might work. But for now, I don't see any way that a coach working in California could legally comply with AB5 unless they are hiring on a coach as an employee. And to do that, then what are you going to do? You're going to have them recording their hourly, have them using an app, basically recording how many hours they work with a client. And then if that's the case, the expense is so high, there's no incentive for an independent contractor coach like that to work with somebody like me. Right.
I talked to a bike shop that I think you know as well, and they were saying, it's a problem for them because they had I think mechanics were coming in and doing it as independent contractors, and now this whole situation has changed kind of the bike business because they're booming, but that still, it doesn't mean that you don't have projection. And look, you to fight it, the liability, it's similar to me as a small business owner. You're going to go into an administration judge and you're going to fight it with, the fines would just end up, next thing you know, you're looking for a job. So that's bummer for you. And I think that's the unintended consequences. Like actually me, I think I'm exempt. So it's not a problem for that. But why me? Why not you? It's
the lobbying groups
yes. You were not part of the transportation union, I think. So.
Yeah, and I think it was dentists, doctors. They all kind of got their their protection. And again, for me, I can look at that and I can say, man, I've spent like hundreds of hours trying to make this work and trying to kind of really enjoying the process of teaching other coaches and learning from them. So I can spend my energy doing that, or I can say, all right, here we go. What's next? Like how are we going to? So what my kind of larger dream is over the next 2 years is to kind of have a coaching consortium to where Data Driven Athlete also kind of sells an educational product for coaches, to where continued education and discussion about high level discussions about training topics and access to a workout library, and that maybe we could provide something like that for coaches in kind of in that kind of form, as opposed to basically them working as independent contractors for me. So that's something I'm really excited about in the next couple of years, and so we'll see if that works out.
Okay, so maybe that transitions into the book thing. So you've been writing a book, right?
Yeah.
And I've read some of your excerpts that you've had out there. And I have some stuff I kind of want to go through with some of those. But why don't you give us first an idea of what the main scope of the book is, and do you have a title, launch date? Are you doing self-publishing?
Yeah, so that's another really good question. So I started working on kind of some of these ideas last July, and I pitched it to a couple different publishers, and the biggest one actually got back to me, and it was incredibly. I'm so glad that I had these conversations, because I don't know if I ever would have had the. I don't know if I ever would have been willing to invest the energy required to go through with it. But anyway, she talked with me, and her basic thing is that like, we love, one of the reasons why it's taken so long for us to get back to you is that your proposal was so good, and we've taken it up kind of the chain, and we're really excited about it. And, we all agree that we've never really seen anything like this, kind of this combination of ideas. And what it comes down to, or how it was pitched to me, and the more that I've read, is kind of like, obviously the cycling book space isn't even a space, right? Like there's very few people that are buying cycling books, which is, if you're trying to make money selling books, I don't think anybody would ever write a cycling book, right?
Well,
so
you've got to have, my day's cheating, or, the Lance Armstrong, or da-da-da-da.
Exactly. So if a publisher is going to pick up your book, you have to have one of two things. You need to have, a high profile name, like you mentioned, where, you've written and you've got some, scandalous story to tell or whatever, or you've raced at a high professional level or whatever.
Have you thought of putting your own photo on the front cover with those shorts you used to wear?
I would be totally comfortable doing that.
Okay, well then you may get some clicks.
Yeah, that wouldn't be below me at all. So the second thing the second way that people kind of edge into that kind of publishing world is that you build a massive social media following, right? And that is essentially exactly. So that's essentially your meal ticket, where the publisher is looking at you and they're saying, "I love your idea," or maybe they don't, but the idea sounds good, but ultimately, we're a venture capital firm, right? We're looking at your idea and we're saying, who can we sell this idea to? In the event that we can't, connect those dots, like, we're not going to invest money in your project, just because you look like you have good ideas, right? So my pitch kind of back to them is that, like, my relationship with social media is central to some of the biggest themes in this book, right? Like, and that was eventually where, at that time, I still had some social media, I still had a Facebook account and whatnot. But then, after that, I think that was one of the things that kind of led me to kind of cutting off those accounts is really feeling like it's inconsistent for me to engage in social media while at the same time feeling like if I had an honest conversation with my clients, I'd be pretty confident saying, I bet you'd be faster if you deleted your Facebook account. I mean, if you wanted it to be that simple, I bet you would be faster if you spent less time looking at your friend's Strava rides. Like I don't think I could, right. I can't say that and then be like, yeah, but I have I have my Facebook account.
Right.
I didn't feel like I could. So that kind of comes back to kind of the publishing thing. So the more I started looking into that and I listened and read a handful of books, the other way is to kind of fund yourself, right? So the self-publishing space is one in which, like, you could either just, push click, or you could save your own money and you can hire an editor and a graphic designer, and you can essentially, raise your own capital to fund what is, an equally professional publication. So that's what I'm planning on doing.
Are you doing any kind of like what is it? It's not GoFundMe, but it's similar for projects that you want to do, and you put out there, and people can donate and be kind of part of that documentary publishing technique product or whatever. Are you doing any of that?
No, I haven't thought about anything like that. Right now, kind of the scale of my project is, just like training, it's kind of recognizing, because I've enjoyed writing for a long time on my website, and it's something that I've realized that it's not just a marketing opportunity, it's something that I really, really enjoy. It's something I love doing. And I think I realized too that, like, if you want to take on a bigger challenge, like let's say you have a goal to write, a larger book, that goal happens in the small habit of just saying, every morning I'm going to write 500 to 1,000 words. Like, that's it. And then whatever happens over the course of the 3 years that I'm doing that, then we'll see how that works out. So that's essentially been kind of the scale of what I've been working on, is saying, kind of moving through, a lot of different topics and outlining those different topics, and then kind of, refining those pieces as I kind of move along. And then, hopefully within the next year and a half, like, I would love to, for me, the target date would be, to have it finished by around July of next year. That would
so
be
what's the topic? What are you looking? Hey, this is how you train periodic, or is it more of a theory book? What's the
So I think where it's a little bit different is it's a combination of training philosophy and training practice, right? So right now, when you look at training books, generally what you'll find a book that maybe lays out periodization schemes, or has a bunch of sample workouts, and it kind of describes just specifically the training, the training process. And I think that the more that I started thinking about this, and in working with athletes over the past 10 years, and also kind of this shift of training knowledge really being restricted to coaches and maybe people who have a lot of experience in the sport, to now it's like the access to the training knowledge is available to anyone. right? There's no,
Right.
you could go on any cycling forum or anywhere, and people are oftentimes discussing or debating the same training topics that maybe a really good coach is reading about in a new research article. So that access to information, is no longer the challenge. I think the greater challenge now, whether or not you are a coach or whether or not you are self-coached, the greater challenge is, what do I do with all of that? Right? So I just came across this article about training technique XYZ. Okay, fine. Like, what do I do with that? And I see this, and we've kind of had this challenge on our blog where over the past 10 years, I've written about, different training techniques or supplements or kind of nutrition topics. And I think that's good. And I've enjoyed doing that. But when I step back and kind of look at that, it's like, I don't know if that's as useful anymore when everyone is sharing information. I think what's lacking is, how do you tie that together to help you get faster in a sustainable way? And I think a good coach is doing that. They're the ones that are tying all that together. But that is, I think, increasingly the coaching market is going to shift from where coaches used to simply prescribe workouts for people. That market's gone, right? Like Trainer Road, Zwift, whatever other product that you might be using, they do that pretty well, right? So I think where the challenge is going to be is, how do you integrate prescribing workouts, and then how do you integrate kind of trying to assimilate and synthesize all of this information that most kind of enthusiast or competitive cyclists are consuming, right? They're listening to podcasts, they're going into forums, they're talking with their friends, they're inundated with all these different training topics. What do you do with that, right? So that's kind of the challenge that the book is seeking to address, is to say, there is a system that you can both access, you can continue to access information, and there's a system where you can place that in its proper context, rather than be running around trying everything. Like, oh, there's this, there's this supplement and there's this supplement. And oh, these guys are doing these training intervals over here. These guys are doing that. It's in that scenario where people are not going to be at their best. And so that's kind of, that's the larger, I'd say, challenge the book is seeking to address. In addition to, I think what exacerbates this is the fact that we are more easily distracted than ever before, right? So how does that impact an ability to try and excel in an activity that takes total focus, right? I mean, yeah. I find this myself. I'm like, I think I'd like to pull over and check my text messages, right? Like, just the ability to do that. Or I think I'd like to get on the internet for a little bit, yeah. Right? Like, how do you manage that? How do you manage the fact that, our culture and technology makes it easy to be instantly distractible at all times, and yet those people that are really good on the bike are laser focused, right? Right.
So I want to ask you some specific coaching things here in a little bit, but I saw this excerpt you posted on your blog, and I'm going to read it because you wrote it, and I loved it, and then I kind of want to have some talk about it. And it starts off here. You say, the scientific revolution has not been a revolution of knowledge. Well, actually, you're making a quote here. It has been, above all, a revolution of ignorance. The great discovery that launched the scientific revolution was the discovery that humans do not know the answers to their most important questions. That was Yuval Noah Harari. And then you go on to talk about evidence-based, science-based information. And I just want to read one bit here. From silver bullet intervals to magic training supplements, our imagination is often the most significant obstacle to making long-term progress on a bike. An information filter built on science ensures we stay focused on the fundamentals of training while deflecting, distracting, cycling hacks to the fringes of our training philosophy. And you go on to say more. What I loved about part of this was, and I don't know what you know about postmodernism, okay? There's this whole theory of postmodernism, Foucault, Derrida, and their original idea that there's non-truth and that nothing is set necessarily. And then there's been people that have written, and I think they've kind of taken that over to not be what originally was meant to be. But if you take the scientific method and you approach that with kind of this postmodernism thing, you're always looking at there's not everything's done. We've seen science in cycling change over and over and over. And is that kind of what you're talking about here of don't rest on the laurels of this is the known be all end all for cycling, and let's keep looking at other methods that work because things change. We talked about, you were talking about a few years ago with me, we're riding to burn fat and, just the different ways of going about it. I mean, eggs used to be bad, then they're good, butter, da 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 da. So what is your take on this, and am I misunderstanding some of that?
Yeah. Well, my what I'm talking about kind of in that section there is that science isn't perfect, right? And the scientific method isn't perfect. It's just the best that we have, right? So if you want to look at kind of the arc of progress, you can criticize science and you can say, yeah, but maybe they got this wrong, maybe they got this wrong. But it's that arc that provides our best guide. Now that doesn't mean that we totally disregard anecdote, or that doesn't mean that we disregard maybe our own experience or our own feelings about, hey, I tried this and that, maybe that doesn't mesh with kind of current practice or kind of what science is suggesting. So it doesn't mean that we reject all those different kind of inputs into how we make choices, but it does mean that there are professionals, and I'm going to have a new excerpt that I'll have out in the next couple of days. Kind of the next section that we're getting into is kind of about identifying sources and kind of how to identify true expertise in cycling. But there are people that have invested, and of course this is the case over every discipline, from law to epidemiology to whatever it is. But there are people who have invested their whole life, and not just in trying to understand these topics, but in also working closely with other professionals to build consensus in their areas of expertise. And it's not that those are the only voices that matter, but it is that there is a prioritization of information. And when there is a YouTube video from a cycling influencer, whoever might that be, talking about something, the fact that they have 1 million followers is not the same as a researcher who has been working for years at a high level of research, in addition to maybe acting as an advisor to some of the best World Tour teams. Like, those two sources of information are not the same.
Of course.
And I think that you would say, of course, right? But I don't think the rest of the cycling world is as comfortable making that distinction. And I think they're more confused by that. And I think that the current age of the internet, to where there's the flattening of kind of expertise. I think that if you want to kind of simplify your training and you want to bring more efficiency and for your training to be more impactful, the guide is to follow that of expertise through the scientific method. So that's, yeah.
Well, so what do you do about you have a blog, you're going to have, let's say you're a coach like yourself and you've gone over many stages of training. Things change, right? And maybe I'm sure you've formed different opinions on certain things that you used to have to what you have now based on new information that comes about. And I think, and just knowing you personally, I think that's something you've done. And that is important, because I'm sure you have people that, look, they make a scientific breakthrough and maybe that's their name stuck to it and they're an important person. And then things change later on. It's not easy to then back off of those stances. Yeah. So how do you deal with that in this regard as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about that kind of in the next section, but like, one of the hallmarks of expertise is that you're always seeking methods to prove yourself wrong. Constantly, right? So like, true experts are, and this is really the process of research, is that you're saying, let's figure out all the different ways where I might be wrong here, right? And they're constantly seeking to bounce their ideas off other professionals, off other labs. They're, obviously that's the process of peer revision, right? Or peer review, where, you're submitting your ideas, in a perfect world. Obviously this doesn't happen all the time, but in a perfect world, those methods are being combed over to look for any errors or, and again, it's not that process is perfect, but it is the best that we've had. And it is the best that we have. And when it comes to kind of shaping a philosophy of simplicity, which is really kind of the other subtext of this book, is about kind of forming a philosophy of training simplicity that stands in stark contrast to the complexity that kind of popular cycling conversation, I think, is driving things, right? If you can make the conversation about training so complex and so incomprehensible, then you can be the one that kind of holds that baton to say, follow me, right? I have the answers. This is so complex. Just do this, right? But I don't think that that's actually, like, if you look at people who ride really, really well, I don't think they're training that way. And I think that science is what helps guide kind of the paring down of all the non-essential items of our training. So that's kind of what, and obviously I have a bent. I love science. That's a part of my training. I wouldn't ever consider myself a cycling expert. I would consider myself very proficient at sourcing the best cycling expertise. That would be where I would kind of assess my level of expertise, not as a cycling expert, right? So it doesn't mean that the only people we listen to are researchers or people that are working in a lab, but it means that if someone is giving advice that is playing a big role in your training, that it would make sense to understand the source of that advice. And
let me ask you a quick question. So let's say you have an idea, and then you see there's some research out there that just by the title and the synopsis might go down a route you are. And then you see something that you're like, I don't believe that, and it's the same type of research. Do you take the same? I mean, are you able to strip your bias out and go and look for the problematic in the one that you like or that you hope to? I mean, I'm sure you're going to say yes, but are you aware of that? I mean, just a quick thing. I don't know if you listened to my last podcast, the Semper Poro thing where this guy writes a story and everyone's blowing up. And the first thing I look at is there's quote marks everywhere and no one is attributed to this story. Nobody. Yeah. And so I'm immediately like, it could be true. It sounds, So I talked to an insider and he's like, dude, it's like a third true, a third is like sensationalism, a third is like, disgruntled people. So you have that. Anyway.
Yeah. So I would say that's another part of kind of the research process, is that you very well could have somebody who, is a PhD level researcher, and that might be one kind of data point in offering perspective on a training principle, right? But the larger perspective, I would say, in the training space is looking for consensus statements, right? So what you'll see across the board when it comes to research that really applies to that most heavily applies to cycling or other sports is you'll see groups of researchers that get together and they hammer this stuff out, and then they develop consensus statements about, let's say, protein in cycling or carbohydrates in cycling, or so there'll be different topics like that. So I think that is really kind of that's the barometer that can help you assess maybe other studies or other perspectives. If a perspective is so far outside the bounds of kind of what current consensus is, it certainly doesn't mean that you ignore that person, but it means that there's a process of putting it in context and of prioritizing that. Or maybe you look at it and you say, man, those raise a lot of really valid points. And then if that's the case, then there's then a process to implement that in training and then to observe the results. Right? But that's entirely different than saying, I saw Hot Legs supplement, blah, 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 and so used it, so I'm going to spend $40 to try it out, right? Like that's a different, that's a different process of making training decisions. And on average, I think the person who simplifies their training, starting kind of with that foundation of the scientific method, if you just want to boil this down, to brass tacks, that person gets faster, quicker, for longer than the person who is constantly chasing, different training hacks or supplements, as they're overwhelmed by all of that input from the internet, YouTube, podcasts, all that kind of stuff.
That's so the hacks part, it gets me because when I was real big into golf, and I remember there's a certain golf club where you can cure your slice or your hook with it, and I remember thinking at the time, I just want to actually cure the slice and the hook instead of trying to get this one club that's supposed to do it, because you've still got a fundamental breakdown that's not happening. Let me ask you a quick question here. I've never heard of this term. You wrote another excerpt called The Autotelic Cyclist, and I just liked one little comment here. It said, a narrow perspective defines the autotelic cyclist, a rider that appreciates training for its present moment value rather than viewing it as compulsory burden required for future greatness. This is possibly the whole concept that all of us are in at this point, right? I mean, what are you training for? But I've never heard that term autotelic. Explain to me exactly what that is. And then how are you dealing with this moment with your clients when there's really nothing to prepare for?
Yeah, so this is kind of another part of the book, in terms of defining kind of a larger philosophy of training and kind of some of those, I think some of those larger themes that we all, any of us that have been writing for a while, or even maybe not so long, we all feel those themes. And maybe we've all kind of developed somewhat of our own philosophy about training, but we just don't know exactly how that fits into how we should make decisions about how we train. So that kind of goal, essentially developing the ability to take joy and to enjoy the act of training, rather than it simply being like, I've got to do this because I'm going to be doing this, right? And when one can develop that appreciation for the bike. And obviously this ties into, what a lot of other people have heard about, the importance of the process, that process oriented goals, or, a process oriented approach is much more successful long term than just having a goal oriented approach. So I think, there are certainly ways to kind of bake that into your training. And I've noticed over the last 10 years, like a shift in how I try to communicate some of these things, where you might be communicating effectively, or you might be prescribing effectively the same thing when it comes to an interval target, where you might be, let's say, I want to prescribe an interval that I think might help to improve a rider's lactate threshold, right? So let's say, you might have the same goal, but how might an interval workout look different with that objective in mind? The objective to kind of enjoy the process of training, as opposed to it just simply being another brick towards another goal.
And what's kind of your hack for that? I mean,
I would say I think the greatest hack for that is to recognize the areas of your riding that have the greatest impact in reducing your rate of perceived exertion. Right. So for most of us, that's going to be a racing context, or that's going to be, maybe going after a Strava KOM or whatever. Right. Like those are the types of environments where what that effort feels like is going to be markedly different than if I said, all right, Tyler, go out and I want you to do 300 watts for 20 minutes. Start your Garmin, go. Right. It's going to be a totally different experience. And so I think I would say that's the primary kind of adjustment, is to say, where can we kind of impact all of training with this different approach or this different focus? To say, hey, here's some differences that you might make, right? Here's some adjustments you might make to your ride. So traditionally, people might say, hey, you know what? If you're going to go out on an endurance ride, you need to ride for 4 hours. Don't stop. Keep the pedals moving. Whatever you do, don't stop, right? That's going to provide the greatest, physiological benefit to you. Okay. Well, what if that idea of just being on the ride, constantly not stopping, what if that sucks? What if that makes me hate training, right?
Hates your chode.
Right? So, yeah, right? So again, so an adjustment might be to say, what does a 4-hour ride feel like for you? Like, is that a huge goal? Does that feel kind of insurmountable to you? What is, so there's different adjustments you might make in kind of progressing up to that goal. But in the intermediate, it might be, hey, you know what? I want you to stop halfway through. I want you to map out the coolest coffee shop in the area. And I want you to pinpoint that on your ride. And I want you to stop at the coffee shop, and I want you to take 15 minutes. I might also suggest you get a highly caffeinated beverage. That might increase your power output, in the second half of the ride. Right. So there's that benefit. But maybe just the act of you stopping and maybe calling your spouse or whatever, checking in with them and just relaxing, maybe that makes that entire ride feel different to you, and really feel like a larger piece of life and what it feels like to have fun on the bike, as opposed to, here we go, 4 hours, got to get it, right? So there's obviously a spectrum where at a high professional level, there might be more times when you have to push that boundary, because maybe stopping in the middle of your ride and relaxing, maybe that's not, contributing to you continuing to get better. So you could cross that bridge when you get there. But I think for most of us, infusing more enjoyment and presence and that feeling of what we all have felt like when we either just started riding or when we just got a new bike or whatever, it can be done. It can be done to have more fun and to appreciate that training process as opposed to it just being an obligation, to get ready for some criterium coming up.
Right. You know, it's so interesting for me is when this whole pandemic started, my fitness was, and my weight, and my weight's been coming down a little bit. I've been riding more than this is almost back to when we were working in 2015 for nationals, and my fitness is coming. I did you say do 20 minutes at 300 watts. I did 40 minutes at 300 watts a few weeks ago out at Mosquito Ridge, which for me is my real point of this is I'm riding better and I'm enjoying it more, but I'm much more consistent. I'm, go out in the middle of the day, boom, do an hour or so. And like I was telling John Novikov, our friend who, God rest his leg, I guess he just went from that side effect. Side note, his wife sent my wife a text last night saying, oh, she found John's Garmin. He was mountain biking and he went from 19 to 0, like immediately. And then my wife responds back, is it too late to reference him as Sonny Bono? I think that might be really insensitive, but that's how the Janke family rolls.
You're going to light up Twitter again.
Yes, to the Bono family. But anyway, I'm enjoying my riding, and I think it's the ability to do a longer ride, but more efficient because I'm just working from home. Maybe this is kind of how you've been doing things. But I have nothing to go for, but I'm getting fitter and more fit, and I'm really enjoying it. Okay, let's turn away from a few things. Chris sent me some questions he wants to, and I know we're getting into it here. Let me go send these off to you. I'll say them out. Maybe you can do some kind of quick rapid fire answers here. Have you seen a shift toward virtual training from your clients? If so, how do you manage that? 2 hours outside, doable, 2 hours inside, less doable, etc.
Yeah, so this is kind of getting along those same lines. And this actually gets into another topic of like, I actually think that people that love Zwift, I actually think they're a subspecies of cycling.
Exactly.
I'm convinced, and this is not degrading to those people. No. I'm just convinced that you have the cyclist who loves being on Zwift, oftentimes prefers that method of riding over being outside, which, holy cow, I cannot make any sense of that. But I think that is a different person who is maybe more, they kind of have like a gaming DNA, a gamer DNA. And then I think there's the other person that's like, Zwift is great, hey, whatever, but I will do anything and everything to not be on the trainer. And I think that's like me, that describes me. I haven't been on a trainer in a year. Anyways, I think that's just interesting. It's like there's a distinct shift, and I think you see this in people being on Zwift right now. But anyways, I think to get to the point of that, I think the first question is what is your relationship with riding indoors, right? So to kind of get back to that same goal of kind of developing this ability or this skill of being an autotelic cyclist is to say, what is your relationship to the trainer? In the same way we might say, what is your relationship to riding in the rain or riding when it's cold or whatever? And that's really the first question. So I've had some athletes, I usually don't believe them. And so I run them through like a test, but they'll say, oh yeah, I can do 2 hours on the trainer, not a big deal. And whenever someone says that to me, I always think to myself, that's impossible.
Right.
Well, no, I don't think that. I think I have run into a couple people that are psycho enough to love being on the trainer, but they're the exception, right? So I would say that for most people, I think it's better to assess kind of what your relationship is to the trainer and then to always, reduce the overall duration of spending time on the trainer and to basically find that pain point. Like, what is the pain point that enables you to continue, like you mentioned, to continue to be consistent? Because ultimately consistency is the most important thing. And I talk about this in the book where you want to draw out principles of training. Consistency is, for anybody, is at the very, very top. I'd rather you be consistent at riding 20 minutes a day on Zwift than you do a couple 2-hour bombs and then just hate life so much, right? So the first step is to kind of evaluate your relationship with being indoors. And then I would say to dial things back down to say, what is the level that you get on the trainer and you're like, that's fine, that's good. And that's the level that we want to start at. And then if things change and you're like, man, I'm kind of enjoying this. I feel like I could open things up and maybe do like an hour or like maybe do an hour and a half. Then we'd say, you sure? Okay, well, let's check it out. But to always find that, that lowest point that flies under the radar. And that's kind of how my riding has been for the last 2 years, where it's like, I want to find the point where when I think about my ride the next day, I'm like, oh, cool, I'm going to go on a ride. Instead of, oh, I got to do blah, 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 right?
Right.
So I think that's the first step is to kind of see how, and the same thing goes with riding in the rain, right? If you say, I cannot stand riding in the rain, well, then maybe you address what some of those limitations are. Like, what's your equipment like? Do you have, and kind of work from there.
Okay. This kind of goes to the next one, actually. Have you altered your personal approach to riding training due to COVID?
I would say yes. One of the things I've always cherished on my rides is I stop at a gas station.
Oh.
I did, well, no, I smell the gas.
You get your Coke and your Snickers bar out there.
Well, it shifts. Yes. Now it has been a giant gargantuan apple fritter, which I have trained my gut to be. That is like a carrot to me. I can devour that, and it fuels my body in the same way that a high quality salad.
I had one of those big ones out at Apple Hill last year, and I got it with the kids, and it was huge. And my in-laws and other ones were watching me, and I'm like, I'm gonna eat it all in one sitting because I can't stop. Where do you get this fritter on your ride?
So at some of the gas stations up there in what I say is the best
gas
riding
station
in the world,
fritter.
Shingle Springs. Yeah. So they have like local vendors that will supply. So anyways, I get a gas station fritter, and then I get a cup of bad coffee, and then I sit there and I watch people, and people will come by and they'll talk about my bike.
Throw you some money.
Yeah. So it's one of those ritual things that have been one of my favorite things. So I've decided that I don't really think that makes sense. Like to take me and my contacts from Fair Oaks and then to go up to Shingle Springs. So I've cut that out. I've cut that out of my riding. So basically I stop at a different spot. I have to, I actually bought, my wife was just horrified by this, but I actually bought a box of Hostess donuts on Amazon. Because again, this let me explain, don't judge. This is about finding, I think, this piece of a bike ride that is enjoyable. For me, I can do a fig bar, but I don't want to do 2 fig bars. I mean, come on. I want a bad donut. And that is fun to me. And I'm in the middle of my ride and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to be stopping and I'm going to pound those 6 little crumbly Hostess donuts. And that's fun.
Right. And if your body can handle it, because when we've done that ride and you're like, a Coke and a Snickers, I'm like, I'm all down. Yeah. And then the ride home, I'm just kind of tweaking and it's not right. Yet I used to be a guy, when you talk about donuts, I was telling the kids the other day, I was like, this friend and I in high school, we had coupons. So we went to, it was like a Dunkin' Donuts. We each got 2 dozen and we ate them. I threw up that night, but it was enjoyable. So donuts. So
that's been the modification, stop riding. And then I would say the other, the hardest modification for me is not seeing my friends riding on the weekend, right? So for me, my training has kind of been, look, during the week I work from home, but I also provide the full on childcare for our kids when my wife goes to work as a nurse. And so that's my situation right now. And so my riding reflects that. I never do group rides. I can never do group rides. If I do a group ride, it means I'm not helping bathe my kids. And that doesn't work for me. So that's been the hardest thing for me. That's where I get my intensity. That's how I dose my intensity. Cause I say, I'm not going to go out and do intervals by myself. That's not going to happen, but I will go out on a group ride and I'll ride as hard as I possibly can and it'll be fun. So that's been the biggest adjustment.
You tuned me into this a few years ago was just doing TSS. So I pretty much just build everything off of, how much time I have. And what I've done the last 2 weekends is I've done Coffee Republic by myself. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's so stupid, but, it's I went out.
I think I would cry. I think I would just break down.
No, it was, I put a hard effort up ridge. And matter of fact, the week before that, some dude jumps on my wheel up Indian Hill and I just put up a hard.
Perfect.
And I'm like, and I'm ramping it up. And I mean, I ramp it harder and harder. And then we get to the steep section. He starts to come around me and then he sits up like I'm giving up. And I just click, click, click and went through. And,
what a gift. You should have sent him some donuts.
I should have. Okay, let's go to the new one here. Any new developments in the future from Training Peaks, new metrics or software that you know of?
Wow. Well, this is getting into a larger question and a larger project that I've been working on. So I'm actually going to be
then we'll come back. You come back again another time.
Well, we don't need to touch on that. I'm going to be over the last couple of weeks and over this next month. I'm going to be moving all of my athletes to a new training platform.
Wow.
And part of that is some of that frustration that as a coaching tool, maybe there hasn't been as much innovation.
They never added segments like you had always wanted, right? Kind of like the Strava.
Yeah, I mean
that's holding you back, but
yeah. So no, I don't know of anything that's been part of my frustration.
Do you want to say what the new platform is?
Yeah. So today's plan, they've been the official training partner for like Bora Hansgrove and Team Ineos, and so they've been around the game for a while. But I would say the biggest difference I see with them is that they seem to be much more driven by power and flexibility and customizability in their platform, whereas I think Training Peaks has made their wager on the side of simplicity and kind of maybe mass appeal. That's my own take. And so that, I think from a coaching perspective, I don't want that. That's not the tool that I want. I want to be able to just constantly be challenged and have to be watching YouTube videos and reading things to learn about how to, utilize more tools to help push me and push my athletes. So that's another conversation. But
just real quick on that. So is it, let's say you train yourself and you've had Training Peaks and you're going to want to switch over. Is this a plan that would take your info kind of like, hey, here's where your fitness is, or you're going to have to start from zero if you go to something like that? Does that make sense? Like your CTL is, 80 over at Training Peaks. Now you're going to start this new plan. Is it?
No.
I mean, I don't even know if they have anything comparable, but does it?
They do. So to Training Peaks' credit, they were the originators of concepts like Dr. Andrew Coggin, who worked with Training Peaks, were the originators of concepts like TSS, normalized power, FTP, all that kind of stuff. So to their credit, all the other training platforms have copied or come up with some derivative of those types of metrics because they've become so ubiquitous across cycling kind of jargon. So if you were to go to another platform, every single other platform out there has something that you would understand as being comparable to whatever it is that you've been doing in Training Peaks.
Gotcha. But yeah. To answer my question, if I were to transfer over, is my fitness then at zero on the other side? Is it going to take me a while to build up, or how does that work?
No. You just have to import all of your workouts, and there's a process to do that. So I'm actually working on a bunch of screencasts for my athletes to like walk them through it. So yeah, you just export all your data, bring it into the new platform, and then you'd be up and running.
Would you have to take that off of Training Peaks if you're deleting it off of your Garmin?
No. You mean could you still have your data there?
Like hey, my Garmin, I clear the rides out. So where am I going to transport this data over? And no, this is getting into the weeds, but
right. So Garmin basically kind of works as the pipeline. So you can, your ride goes up to Garmin. Exactly. So your ride goes up to Garmin Connect, and then Garmin Connect is where you can choose where to push. Do you want to push to Training Peaks, Strava? Yeah.
Gotcha. Perfect. Last question here. You've made a shift to less is more with data on rides. How is that going, and what's that about?
Yeah, so that would again go back to that kind of that same concept of like as much data as is helpful. I would say that's my general philosophy. So kind of like you, for me when I do my rides, I have a similar to TSS but kilojoules. So it's a measure of work. So I say, hey, I want to get 2,000 kilojoules on a 3-ish hour ride. That's my target, right? So it's kind of like you're really peering at your ride from a much larger perspective, as opposed to being there on the ground level saying, right now I am doing 250 watts for 2 hours, maintain that intensity, right? For some people in some contexts, that level and that granularity of feedback is helpful for them. For me, right now, where I'm at with my kids and other limitations, that's the last thing I want to do. I want to see the time. I want to know when I need to get back because we're going to be doing something as a family. And then I want to roughly know if I need to pick it up a little bit or if I'm, that's basically the only metric that's really of value to me. It's like, if I look at that and I'm like, something's wrong, right? Like my normal kind of work output over a ride like this, I'm totally off that. So for me personally, that's the only thing that's helpful. Again, I think for most athletes, they would be better served by taking that approach to say, what is the most relevant data? What is the relevant data to me on this ride? And then setting up their Garmin or their Wahoo in a way to eliminate all those other channels, right? Just like, and again, this kind of gets back to the book about a difference in philosophy, is that if you can eliminate the number of channels that you're having to process, I think you're able to execute more effectively. And I think that goes to what you're looking at on your Garmin. I think that goes to what channels you're tuning into, in your media consumption or social media or whatever. So yeah, for me, I love data. I'm constantly learning about new ways to utilize data. This new platform that we're shifting to, it's more complex. It's more powerful. It has more analytics, and I love using all of those. And at the same time, if I was working with you, I would say, just go ride for 2 hours and tell me how you feel. Like, I think that is for most people, is a much better approach and a much better method to begin to develop that love and appreciation of riding and training than is go for 2 hours, maintain a power output of 200 watts with a cadence between 90 and 110. Gotcha. I think that's a waste of energy for most people.
Gotcha. Really interesting, Nate. I really appreciate it. Hey, where if people want to sign up with you as a client, get in touch with you, where do they do that? I know you're not on social media, but...
Yeah. So, our website, or my website, is datadrivenathlete.com. And everything's there. I kind of like that. Just one spot. If you try and find me on Facebook or Instagram, I'm not there. If you try and send me a message on Twitter, I probably won't read it.
Okay, so that's good to know.
The website.
Yeah. And if people want to know a little bit more about Nate Dunn themselves, they can, I think it was episode 2. I'll put a link to that as well, where we talk to you exclusively about kind of your whole deal, your transplant games, I'm sure all that stuff's being pushed off. Maybe we'll bring you back on and we'll talk about some more of that. Nate, I really appreciate it. I look forward to the book coming out. We're going to have an actual book, because you want to put one of those on or is it only going to be ebook?
No. It'll be, there's a whole bunch of other kind of cool stuff that I want to do in terms of the book design, which is another reason why I want to do it myself. So it'll be a real book, and it'll be a really cool real book. It'll be a really, really cool book. Looking book.
Well, if there's not a picture of you in those Star Spangled Banner shorts,
I will see.
I'm gonna be disappointed.
I will talk to my editor and see if we can maybe get one of those in.
Bare chested with a shield. That's what I want.
Yeah,
all right.
Fine.
Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Episode 174. Nate, I really appreciate it as always. Love you. Hope things are going well, and hope to see you back on the bike sometime soon.
Yeah, man. You too.
All right. Take care.